So welcome everybody. I'm Kathy Kuntz. I'm the director of the Dane County Office of Energy and Climate Change, and I'm happy to welcome you to this Sustainable Leaders Collaborative meeting where we're going to talk about green infrastructure. And I'm super excited. We've got Mike Rupiper from CARPC here with us today to talk about the Black Earth Creek Watershed project. And we wanted to spend some time with SLC members talking about green infrastructure, but this project is like a cool thing to talk about because it's really collaborative across multiple towns and villages. And I think that's an important thing for all of us to be thinking about as we look forward to all of the funding from the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act. There's going to be a lot more opportunities for our local communities to come together and partner around green infrastructure projects. And so I think this project can provide some interesting insights that kind of lead that forward. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Mike. Mike is the Deputy Agency Director at CARPC, the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission. I'm going to let him tell this story, and then we'll have time for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Kathy, and good morning, everyone. I think I know just about everybody here on the call today, with the exception of maybe Tim White. I haven't had the opportunity to meet yet, but thankful for the opportunity to talk with you this morning a little bit about our green infrastructure plan in the Black Earth Creek Watershed, and also about green infrastructure in general and some of the other efforts that are going on and starting to happen in the region around green infrastructure. So before we get into the Black Earth Creek plan, I just kind of want to touch a little bit about how we, the Regional Planning Commission, sort of got more involved in this area. It goes back to 2018. We're doing a Greater Madison Vision, which was a regional survey to identify priorities for how the region grows as part of our regional development framework update. And we had over 9,000 respondents to the survey, and it was kind of meant for people to identify top priorities for how the region grows in the future. And you can see some of the things that people ranked towards the top of the priorities showed up in this sort of first quartile here. So more renewable energy, green infrastructure, being two of the top things, which are things, of course, that are very near and dear to this group, I would think. So that's kind of something that happened in 2018. And so we started talking with groups about, some of the benefits of green infrastructure. Again, kind of looking at the multiple benefits besides water quality, there's flood management benefits, air quality benefits, urban heat island effect benefits, as well as, economic benefits from whether it's green jobs or increased property values that can come with green infrastructure, a wide variety of benefits. And again, you can see this sort of economic, social, environmental triple bottom line that will resonate with you folks involved in sustainability. Similarly, we looked at kind of what are the reasons for those communities around the country that are pursuing green infrastructure. And again, it's a wide range around this water quality, economic, environmental, social benefits. And you can see different communities across the country have different reasons for why they're getting involved in green infrastructure. But these are some of the top programs of green infrastructure around the country that can serve as models for some of the work that we can do in our area. So getting more specifically into the Black Earth Creek Watershed Green Infrastructure Plan, the idea for this project really then began in 2019. So this was after the big floods in that area of West Madison and Black Earth Creek Watershed that happened in around August of 2018. The Black Earth Creek Watershed Association then in October of the following year, it was one of their annual meetings. They held this event about flooding impacts in the watershed. What can we do to create a healthy watershed amid climate change? So I was one of the speakers at that event to talk about this idea of green infrastructure and green infrastructure planning in the watershed. And that's what really kind of kicked off this idea for a watershed-wide green infrastructure plan. So it's really two motivations. One, as I mentioned, the flood hazard to the communities in that watershed, but also Black Earth Creek, as many of you might know, and some of its tributaries too are important trout streams. So valuable habitat and also economic resource for that region. So for our role, CARPC was really kind of the facilitator of this planning effort. So we started having conversations with the communities in the watershed, the villages and the towns, some of the other stakeholders in the watershed about this idea of doing a watershed-wide green infrastructure plan. And the idea was really well received. You know, the villages in particular were very interested in this. So we had the support that we needed to move forward and applied for a Wisconsin Emergency Management and FEMA Natural Hazard Mitigation Planning Grant to do this work. So we received $150,000 that went towards the consulting costs for the project. And then we were also able to pull in the Army Corps of Engineers in their Silver Jackets program, where they contributed some funds in their own work to do some of the modeling associated with the effort. And CARPC, what we did is we provided the local match that's required as part of this grant through our staff time. So we contributed our staff time working on this project to provide the local match and kind of leverage our resources to obtain this state and federal funding to do the plan. So we had a great steering committee that was really important to this effort. As I mentioned, all three villages, Cross Plains, Black Earth, and Mesa Maney participated, as did the town of Cross Plains, BECWA, which is the Watershed Association. We had folks from Dane County, planning, emergency management. We had folks from DNR, both floodplain management and fisheries involved. Trout Unlimited, Nature Conservancy, Groundswell. So a really good group of stakeholders that help guide this project through the planning effort. And then, as I mentioned, we used the grant money to hire a consulting team that was led by EOR, who was really, the focus was some of the urban green infrastructure and overall watershed planning. And then Sand County Foundation, who really works in the agricultural best management practices in green infrastructure realm. And then Silver Nail Studios is a local firm that actually is in the watershed, that their sort of emphasis is on green infrastructure and GIS planning. So altogether, really well-rounded team and steering committee that helped us guide this work. So the first thing that the steering committee did was sort of identify the goal for the project. So the goal of the planning effort was to identify specific projects and practices that provide a quantifiable level of flood protection to communities, water quality benefits to Black Earth Creek and its tributaries, and recreational, economic, and ecological benefits to the watershed as a whole. So you can see, you know, there was sort of mutual objectives here of flood protection, water quality, as well as the sort of economic and ecological and recreational benefits that can come from these green infrastructure practices, which are important to that region and sort of the recreation-based economic development approach that region is taking. So we looked at basically, you know, green infrastructure was, we felt the best approach to sort of meet all those mutual objectives. And we looked at a wide range of different green infrastructure practices, both in the urban areas, which are kind of these here on the left, and in the rural or agricultural areas, which are these here on the right. So I think, you know, many people traditionally think of green infrastructure as urban stormwater practices, which, you know, these are all examples of that. Things like tree trenches and green roofs and rain gardens and bioretention and porous pavement, green alleys and rain barrels and cisterns, But there's also for the rural side, complementary practices that we also, classify as green infrastructure. So wetland restoration projects and floodplain restoration projects, prairie strips and cover crops, and just even general improvements in soil health can all help promote infiltration, which is really the key to green infrastructure and stormwater management. So we did pretty extensive public engagement through the project. Really, a lot of that was focused through the steering committee. They met bi-monthly throughout the whole course of the project. We held an open house in Black Earth. We did some tabling events at some of the field days and events that they had in the communities in the watershed. Because it was also largely during the COVID time, we did some public webinars that were done via Zoom in an effort to try to reach out with farmers and rural landowners. We held like a pizza night and a cover crop seminar where we had coffee, things like that, to really make an effort to reach out to people, as well as just phone calls and emails and mailings that went out to try to engage the landowners, residents in the watershed. We also, Silver Nail, this was one of their specialties, to set up an ArcGIS hub site where we kind of kept maps for the project and other background information, had a place where people could go to find out the meeting dates and provide feedback on the plan as it was being developed. So really kind of the plan was a watershed-based plan. A large percentage of the watershed is still in farmland, 53%. And then, of course, valley bottoms, both in the urban and rural areas, were a key area because of the trout habitat and that I mentioned, and the potential for wetland restorations there, and it's how it's prone to flooding. Woodlands also make up a fairly big percentage of the watershed, which is also associated with some steep slopes, but can have high infiltration rates. And then the urban areas, while it makes up a relatively small percent of the watershed as a whole, only 3%, many of the developments in that area are older, so they were put in place before our current stormwater standards. So they do present opportunities for retrofit green infrastructure practices that could really make improvements in water quality and quantity in those areas. So part of the plan looked at, what is the flood hazard throughout both the rural and the urban areas. And there is some in both. Rural areas are also susceptible to flood vulnerability and flood hazard impacts and loss of crop associated with that, as well as, the urban impacts. We're all familiar with the impacts of flooding in those areas. So the plan established several recommendations for each of those priority areas. So in urban areas, we looked at permeable pavement, stormwater infiltration, downspout disconnection, and rainwater harvesting and reuse, all being good viable options in the urban areas. Appropriate scale of green infrastructure for the villages in the watershed. So kind of looking at, what is the benefit of green infrastructure. We looked at an ambitious but still somewhat realistic scenario of treating 35 to 50% of existing impervious surfaces with green infrastructure. And the modeling showed that, while that resulted in a pretty small, 0 to 4% reduction in peak flood flow rate, that's because of the percentage of urban area in the watershed is pretty small. There are local flood reduction benefits that were much greater, as well as the water quality benefits that were much greater benefits from green infrastructure in the urban areas and the villages. And on the farmland, the four kind of key practices that we looked at were cover crops, no-till and reduced till, prairie strips, and use of native vegetation. And, again, because of the greater percentage of the watershed, those practices resulted in a greater overall reduction of peak flow rate, ranging up as high as 20% reduction. And of course, in the woodlands, we're looking to maintain the hydrology and ecological functions of those areas, and consider restoring a floodplain and wetlands as a key part of the plan. In valley bottoms, that's, obviously where a lot of the flooding and floodplain and wetlands are. So wetland restoration was a key component of that area, both for storing and infiltrating floodwater, as well as improving water quality and habitat. And then floodplain restoration as well, an ability to attenuate peak flood rates, dissipate some of that energy from flooding, and improve water quality and habitat overall. So the other thing that kind of came out of the plan was this realization that, when you start mapping these areas and you look at the potentials for wetland restoration areas and some of these areas and the areas that are currently being flooded, and a lot of them follow along the Black Earth Creek corridor, you can create some nice connected greenways when you start doing this, and create some opportunities for doing things like regional multi-use, bike pedestrian trails through this corridor that would follow along Black Earth Creek or near Black Earth Creek in many areas. And that's actually part of the vision that region has, Gateway to the Driftless, which is their sort of recreation-based economic development organization. It's one of their focuses is to have a trail that would ultimately go from the west side of Middleton all the way to Sauk City and connect up that way along the Wisconsin River. And so green infrastructure and the implementation of green infrastructure practices in the watershed can be an important, component of that effort, and they can work very well together. So we're just kind of getting into some of the benefits that were modeled as a result of the plan. Again, peak flow rate reductions, we were looking at anywhere from, 5 to 10 to 20%. But peak flow is really, important, but not as important as a reduction in the flooded area. So we found that 10% reduction in the 100-year discharge would remove 22 structures from the floodplain. So that's about a 17 to 18% decrease in the number of structures that would be flooded under current conditions. Again, looking at the socioeconomic benefits of green infrastructure, there's benefits to the flooding of structures that I mentioned, but also the ecosystem services. That's something that FEMA really looks at now in determining the cost benefit of some of these practices, is looking at what are the ecosystem services provided by wetland and floodplain restoration. In the case of Black Earth, like I mentioned, it's a big trout fishery, so there's some fishery value and benefits associated with that, as well as the recreational trail that I mentioned has a potential to really not only increase property values, but serve as an economic driver for the communities in the watershed along that trail system. So we also set some implementation goals, 5-year goals, treating 2% of the impervious cover in the urban areas, improving soil health by 25% a year, approximately 3,000 acres every 5 years in the rural areas. And then the valley bottoms, looking at new stream, floodplain, wetland restoration projects along the creek every 5 years. Again, with the idea of kind of connecting and coordinating those, so that's an opportunity to include an extension of multi-use trails and have a trail system through the watershed. So the plan has been complete now and approved by Wisconsin Emergency Management. We have a project website where you can view the plan if you're interested in learning more details, either just looking at the executive summary or reading the full plan. They're both available on there for you to use, and I can maybe put this in the chat later too. So as far as next steps this year now, and started sort of the end of last year, we're continuing to work with the communities in the watershed, partnering on plan implementation. So we're working on landowner outreach and building partnerships. A lot of these practices, obviously, we need to have willing landowners. So the projects that we're looking at are either, on public land that's owned by a village or town or, the DNR, or there are private landowners that are interested in implementing some of these practices on their land. So we're trying, again, identifying different priority sites, working on funding applications. We're working right now with the village of Cross Plains, collaborating on it's about a 13-acre wetland floodplain restoration site on Brewery Creek, which is one of the main tributaries to Black Earth Creek. That is also a Wisconsin Emergency Management FEMA grant funded project. So working on getting that submitted, that would be one of the first projects that we've would be implemented from the plan. We've also seen some private landowners, a number of churches in particular, that have begun to adopt some of the concepts in the green infrastructure plan and are either planning for or have started implementing some green infrastructure restoration projects on their properties in the watershed. So we're really starting to see this idea of green infrastructure in Black Earth Creek Watershed, I think, really start to take off. And then, of course, we'll be working with communities on design and construction and monitoring and maintenance of this. This is a long-term plan implementation effort is needed to achieve the results that we want to see in the watershed. Now, just kind of a transition here. I also wanted to take this opportunity to kind of mention some of the other green infrastructure initiatives that our agency in collaboration with others are working on to try to promote more green infrastructure in the region. So one is this green infrastructure viewer. So this is a interactive web map. For those of you that have looked at Office of Energy and Climate Change website, they have a similar viewer for renewable energy projects. Some other communities have similar mapping efforts, but this one is to show a different variety of green infrastructure practices in our region. We can kind of look at where they are, learn some basic information about them, and actually then go out and take a look at them. So we feel like this is a kind of a good way to let people know about some case studies of different green infrastructure practices, again, to help kind of promote and encourage adoption of them. So feel free to take a look at this on our website. Again, maybe I can post the link in the chat. And I also kind of want to put out a call if you have green infrastructure projects in your communities that you want shown on this map that aren't already included, please reach out to us. And our goal is to make this as comprehensive as possible, a different green infrastructure in the region. Another is the tree canopy collaborative work. I'm sure you might have already heard about some of this. That's an effort we're working on with, again, Office of Energy and Climate Change, some of the other communities and DNR in the watershed to collectively maintain, protect, and expand tree canopy across the region. We see tree canopy as an important form of green infrastructure. Again, not only for the stormwater, water quality benefits, but urban heat island reduction, air quality, things like that as well. And then finally, this is kind of a new, I'll say it's a concept at this point, but the Clean Lakes Alliance has reached out to us about developing some kind of a regional green infrastructure recognition program where communities or individual businesses or property owners could be recognized for installing green infrastructure on their properties, again, as a way to encourage more green infrastructure in the region. And so again, I kind of want to put out a call that if there's anybody interested in participating in this effort of developing this program, please let me know. We're looking for kind of a core group of individuals that have experience in green infrastructure or in implementing, recognition programs that, we could work with along with Clean Lakes Alliance to develop this program. That's something that we're hoping to work on over, the course of this year, in particular, the first half of this year. But again, a lot of efforts around this idea of encouraging more green infrastructure in the region because it has been identified as one of the top priorities for the region. So that's really kind of all I have. It's kind of a brief overview of what we've done, but I'm happy to talk in more detail or answer any questions if you want to go into anything in particular.
Terrific. Thank you, Mike. That was a terrific overview. I'm sure folks have questions. I have a few, but I want to open it up to folks. We're a relatively small group today. I think you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Curious as far as the trail system and how far along that is in the planning process. Or I know Driftless Land Conservancy is working for walking trails. I was wondering where Black Earth was.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some, I'll say concept locations mapped out through various plans. I think the MPO's transportation plan has had it mapped out. Dane County Park and Open Space Plan has had it mapped out, but they tend to, show these locations in very general terms until they can kind of secure easements or agreements with property owners. That can be a sensitive issue, location of trails. So it's something that we wanted to sort of keep in mind and coordinate with as part of our planning effort, but we didn't explicitly map a specific path for those reasons.
Hey, Mike, I kind of have a two-parter question here, so just bear with me. I understand that this planning process was more done through FEMA and thinking about like flood mitigation as like the top priority. However, this is related to water quality. So I guess I'm wondering, like, does Black Earth Creek have a watershed plan that specifically addresses like water quality parameters? And like, how does this plan like fit in with any of those watershed plans?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, this plan, it was designed to not only look at flood benefits, but also water quality benefits. That was a key component of it that was established by the steering committee from the beginning, that this was not just to be a flood mitigation plan, because water quality and, preservation and enhancement of trout habitat and the recreation opportunities that provides in the watershed were really important and valuable to the communities there too. Because clearly there are some approaches to flood mitigation that, might be a solution from a flooding standpoint, but they wouldn't improve water quality and they wouldn't necessarily improve the trout habitat. And so that's why, we took the green infrastructure approach, because most of those practices would achieve those multiple benefits that a pure, flood mitigation plan wouldn't. So, I would say it's both a flood mitigation and water quality plan. And that's why we termed it a green infrastructure plan. But there hasn't been, to my knowledge, any recent purely water quality plan in Black Earth Creek. There were some number of plans kind of dating back to the priority watershed days that have been implemented, but there has been no like recent active plan that I'm aware of, and I think we would have come across it during our work on this project. Yeah. Did I cover both of your questions, Michelle, or was there something else?
Yeah, I guess just most of my like background and experiences mainly come from just more of like watershed planning, like more on like EPA DNR side of things. So I'm just kind of wondering like, where are the intersect? So I'm just kind of mapping it out in my brain. So thanks for helping me do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, like the idea here was to identify green infrastructure practices that, when implemented would achieve a flood reduction benefit, but also a water quality benefit. And, by doing it as a FEMA, Wisconsin Emergency Management Plan, it kind of sets the communities up for implementation funding through those same grant programs, emergency management in FEMA. But there are obviously, and we identified in the plan, NRCS has programs available for funding. The state, DNR has programs available for funding some of these practices. So there's a wide range. And I think there's been an effort at the federal level to sort of try to better coordinate funding between federal agencies like FEMA and EPA and even Economic Development Authority, and try to, again, kind of around this idea of promoting green infrastructure. In order to do that, we need to sort of coordinate efforts between what, often in the past were three, separate ideas of flood mitigation and water quality and economic development.
Awesome, thank you.
Building on that kind of funding thing, Mike, thinking about the timing of this, I don't know if you've had a chance yet to look at, say, it seems to me the bipartisan infrastructure law might be the best opportunity, that because there's a bunch of stuff there about resilience, that there might be new grant opportunities there, still evolving. Most of the infrastructure money isn't out yet, but you're nodding your head, are you seeing some promising things there?
Well, I think you kind of alluded to, we're hearing some promising things. I wouldn't say we're seeing it yet. Things are kind of evolving, and it seems to take some time from, to go from these funding bills and designation of funds to get to actual grant programs that you can apply for and get money to do projects. So I think we're trying to, as you are, kind of keep abreast of what's happening and look for those opportunities and take advantage of them. And I think that's one benefit of having a plan already in place, is you sort of know what you want to do now. It's just a matter of securing funding to start implementing pieces of it as opportunities do come up.
Yeah, it strikes me that that's a really unique advantage here. We hear in our SLC circle, Kelly Hilliard in Middleton often says that because they did that early comprehensive energy planning at the city level in Middleton, when funding opportunities come, she has a list of, these are our next priorities. And that's essentially what the communities in this collaborative now have, a list of, these are the initiatives we could pursue, that sets them up for success as we start to see some of the more funds flow. I'm also wondering, Mike, I know you were involved, as I was, in the countywide natural disaster hazard mitigation plan. The Black Earth Creek Watershed is just this really, as you laid out, terrific example of where flood concerns coincided with economic development and other opportunities. Are there, I know I haven't yet had the time, the countywide plan is approved now. I haven't read through all of the strategies or issues in all of the community sections of that to have a sense, but I'm thinking you are everywhere across the county. Maybe you already, are there other opportunities for collaboration that are high on your radar that you would love to see communities invite you to an event that launches another conversation?
Yeah, I think there are definitely other opportunities for other communities to sort of take a watershed approach and develop similar plans and have similar planning efforts. This one kind of, I think, was the first because of communities in the watershed were sort of interested and ready to move forward with something like this. Some of the other parts of the region, I'll say maybe the intergovernmental cooperation isn't as strong as it was in this watershed. I think there's definitely opportunities to sort of replicate this kind of effort. That's something that I know we as an agency are hoping for as part of this work, is that we will be able to, work with other communities and do similar planning efforts to this. I think we also recognize that planning efforts, while there's some value to the planning effort themselves, as far as the communication and relationship building that happens during the process, actually implementing the plans is important outcome. And so, we as an agency are spending more of our I'll say staff time and resources on helping communities implement some of the plans we're working with them on once we develop them. So, we're committed to continuing to work with the communities in the watershed on implementing the plan, in addition to looking for new planning opportunities in other parts of the region.
Mike?
Yeah.
You kind of answered the question I had about if elements this can be used in other municipalities, other locations, and I'm thinking about the Token Creek watershed area.
Yeah.
Just this morning, the Token Creek Watershed Association changed its bylaws. They will become known as the Friends of Token Creek, and they'll be having an annual meeting coming up in May. We're hoping for, improved membership. But this is kind of intriguing because the Token Creek Watershed Association, or the watershed, encompasses more than just the village of Windsor. So it encompasses other municipalities. So this is kind of interesting, and would like to explore that a little bit further.
Yeah, I'd be happy to come and talk with you or the group about that further, Bob. I know, in recent years, we've done, besides this project, we've done a project with the Friends of Starkweather Creek. We're potentially this year going to be working on a lake management plan with the Lake Wabisa Conservation Association. That's a multi-community watershed too. So, I think as part of our role as a regional planning agency, we're looking for opportunities to work with communities and watershed groups on some of these planning efforts.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Can I go back for a second to talk a little bit more about funding? Because I'm really interested about mechanisms for funding the implementation of green infrastructure projects. And I'm wondering if you have a avoided cost analysis, or do you know how much avoided cost there is in having to do culverts or hard infrastructure solutions by versus doing green infrastructure? Is it less costly to do green infrastructure? By how much? And is that an avenue to get some of the implementation funded?
Yeah, I mean, that's not something we have any, I guess, hard and fast numbers on right now. And it's something that is kind of also continually changing too. I mean, I know I've heard that recently the cost for gray infrastructure, storm sewer pipes and sanitary sewer and pipes and stuff like that is starting to really increase, because a lot of actually as a result of some of the infrastructure bill funding, a lot of communities have started to implement some of these improvement projects, and it's driving up the cost because of the demand for these materials compared to what's available. So it's an ever-changing situation. But in general, I think we put in the plan that, green infrastructure is competitive with, gray infrastructure, especially when you're looking at across the multiple benefits. But, there's different tools to kind of help you calculate that. But like I said, the economics of it is kind of an ever-changing situation. So I see Peter Hebner is on the call. He was one of our steering committee members. I really appreciate all his contributions, as was Bill Chang when he was still at Cross Plains before he moved to DeForest. So hope you're glad to see that some of your efforts paid off and we have a solid plan that came out of this bill. And maybe there'll be opportunities to do something in the Yahara River area at some point in the future now. Or Token Creek, as Bob was suggesting.
Yeah, exactly. Other questions or thoughts for Mike or for the group in general?
So if no other questions for me, I have a question for you, Kathy, because I think of probably everybody here, you've been the most on top of following what's happening with the Inflation Reduction Act. Have you seen things coming down the pike that seem like they'll be helpful for green infrastructure funding that we should keep an eye on?
So in the Inflation Reduction Act, you know, a lot more of the funding is, 2/3 of the funding is tax credits aimed at, you know, individuals or businesses or via direct pay local governments. There are some tax credits there for, I'm trying to remember the framing. They essentially, it's kind of resilience. It's things about, like, they'll be for rural landowners around things that are around soil health and things, and some of that has the right implications. We haven't seen very much detail about those pieces yet. I mean, in general, we think all of the tax credit pieces are going to have specifications available relatively soon compared to the programs that are involved in these. But under the Inflation Reduction Act, because the focus is so much on making clean energy cheaper than fossil energy, there's not very much else for resilience there. You know, I really keep going back to the Infrastructure Act as being a better source of funding in a grant kind of way for resilience projects. It's sort of how I'm thinking about the pieces of this. Mel is nodding. That's good because she's paying more attention to the some of those resilience pieces.
Yeah, and it's just that, like, a lot of that, there's some vague wording on the website, but it hasn't rolled out yet. So it's hard to say with any specificity what would be directly applicable to green infrastructure versus agricultural writ large. But I don't have anything more than that.
But in keeping with the kind of theme around the benefit of having a plan and priorities, if indeed suddenly there are tax credits for landowners to do certain things like plant more trees or something, I'm sort of making this up right now, but arguably those communities in the Black Earth Creek watershed are in a better position to reach out to landowners and go, hey, you can get federal incentives for this thing that we've all agreed is good for our watershed. You know, you've got people leaning in the right direction, so then the funding can get them over the funding alone is not going to make things happen. We're going to need to go after the folks who were kind of intrigued by these things to begin with or motivated, and then the funding will ideally be what gets them to take action finally. So yeah, I think that those pieces are maybe the opportunities here. Will not the answer. You know, it was nice if the day that they passed the bill they had this all figured out, but it's super clear that the infrastructure bill is 18 months old at this point, and they're still figuring pieces out.
Right. Yeah, I mean, even with the, potential funding coming from the federal level, we're all dealing with limited funds and resources, even staff resources to implement some projects. And I think that's where a plan is really helpful to help establish priorities and where the best benefits are, for the resources, both in time and money.
Well, in a collaborative plan, so that everyone didn't have to, the level of staff time and the money for consultants, if each of those communities had tried to figure out their piece of this on their own, that's substantially higher. I think we wanted, I've been very struck in that when our local governments come together to do clean energy planning, they get a lot more out of the process, and it costs them a lot less than it would if they were doing it on their own. So I think for me, a big kind of piece of this success story is that cross-community collaboration and what the gains are in doing it that way. And I think as we look at some of these federal initiatives, we're going to be better off if we can figure out ways for communities to collaborate to apply for funds, rather than having 4 or 5 local communities competing with each other for federal dollars, and so
Right.
the more we can be kind of wrapping our minds around, well, maybe there are ways to go after this together, the more we'll probably be more successful, and definitely the lift will be lighter than if we each had to do it all on our own. So that to me is like a big lesson out of what you accomplished here with this project.
And especially like, when we're talking about issues like flooding and water quality, it is happening on a watershed basis, and projects that are put in place upstream and Cross Plains, for example, are likely to have benefits to the downstream communities of Black Earth and Mesa Mani. So it makes sense to work together and work collaboratively.
Exactly. Any other thoughts? That seems like an excellent place to end, if no other thoughts. This was terrific. We did record today. We will share that out. Thanks everybody for being here, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.